Hello and welcome to Gazali on Prudent Media. My name is Sachin Chatte and our guest on today's show is nothing short of a living legend. He has donned many hats over the years, but we best know him as one of the pillars who shaped Indian cinema. Our guest today is Mr. Shyam Benegal. Thank you very much, sir, for joining us in the studios here. I have many questions to ask, but we'll start with Goa. Now, you are no stranger to Goa. You shot a couple of films here as well. So, what is your connection with Goa?
Well, you see, my connection with Goa is basically 3 films that I shot here. One was a documentary that I made very long ago in the mid to late 60s, which was about Goa. And that was soon after, about 6-7 years after the liberation of Goa. And after that, of course, I made part of a film called Bhumika, which dealt largely with the Hindu side of Goa. And then I did Tikal, which was the Christian side of Goa. So you see, in terms of the cultures of Goa, I've been very fascinated by it. And also there is some kind of a connection because, you see, my home language is Konkani. And although I don't speak Goan Konkani, I speak Konkani of South Canada. But the community as such is a diasporic community. It moved from one place to another. Right. And these people, that is my own ancestors, moved out of Goa when the Portuguese came, because the Portuguese had the Inquisitions and they were going on an overdrive with conversions at that time. So they moved out and then settled in different parts all the way from Karwar down to Mangalore. So we were part of that. So I have always had a great sense of kinship with Goa. I've had people working with me also. Now Mr. Kamath Ghanekar, his family shop is here, Loja Kamota. Now he was with me and we were partners in a advertising film company. He was the cameraman, I was the director, so we made many films together until he retired and retired back to Goa. So you see, in that sense, there has been a connection. But not that I have any relatives or anything here, but I did build a house here in Vere, which was designed by Charles. Charles Correa designed a whole bunch of bungalows there. Yeah. So one of them was ours. But unfortunately, we never lived there because I was very busy and we could never spend any time there. So we eventually sold it. So our connection with Goa came to an end in that sense. But of course, I do enjoy coming to Goa and it's wonderful to be here because I feel very familiar.
Yeah. Let's not go in a chronological order as far as films are concerned. You mentioned Trikal. Now that is what everybody considers as the best film which is made on Goa about Goan Christians and about the Christian community in Goa. So tell us about how did you make that film? I mean, what was the process of making that film?
See, there are 2 things. One, of course, Goa is unique in the sense that if you look at the history of India, you will find that we've been colonialized, as it were, by different people over the centuries. The rest of India had Mughals and the British. Goa had also the Adil Shahis and so on and so forth, but followed by the Portuguese. Now, when the Portuguese came, that was a European power, like the British were a European power. So they brought also their language and many of the customs and so on and so forth, which they brought from Mediterranean. So there was a certain characteristic of Goa which developed very differently in the last 500 years from the rest of India. Although India, I've always believed, is like a salad bowl. We keep our individualities, yet we are a unity.
Yeah.
So Goa is very much like that. And one of the things is that certain characteristics which you can suddenly recognize as not from anywhere else but Goa. And those have been contributions made by the Portuguese when they were here. And the rest of India would have, you will notice, those characteristics which the British brought to India. And before that, the Mughals who brought to India. So you have a mixture of different kinds of cultures. And I was always fascinated by the Goan culture because obviously I felt that there was a certain kinship and connection. A, because of the language, and B, because of the community that I belong to. Because you see, we have, the Saraswats have, as you know, 3-4 mutts
Right.
in different places. And one of them is Portugali mutt in Goa itself. And then, of course, you have some in North Canada, and then between North and South Canada, you have another mutt. And so there is a, what one might call a cultural connection, which I find very interesting, which is the reason why when my interest got evoked when I made Bhumika.
Right.
Because in Bhumika, it was the story of Hansa Vadkar, and her family, you know, were originally from Goa. And so I decided I was going to shoot that part of it in Goa. So I shot that in Fonda Taluka.
Yes.
And remaining, of course, was in Mumbai, in Bombay. So you had both the kind of characteristics, A, of Maharashtra, middle class Maharashtra and middle class Mumbai, and here you had village atmosphere of Goa itself. So that was, you know, which was my exploration of what one might call the Hindu Goa. And later, when I was making, you know, I was reading up a great deal on Latin-based cultures, you know, like say with all the Mediterranean cultures of Europe and also of South America, and Central America, including Mexico. And I was also reading a great deal of work by writers from different countries of South America and Central America. Like, you know, you had Mario Vargas Llosa and Marquez and so on and so forth. So at that time, it suddenly struck me that there was so much similarity between them and the Goan Christian community. There was a certain kind of what one might call a Latin cultural character that had reverberated, you know, whether it was South America or Mexico, wherever it might be in the Americas, and then also in Asia. So you had that similar certain characteristics. Suddenly, you found that in Goa, you found that in Macau and various other places that the Portuguese had been. And then I wanted to make a film, and I felt, what would be the quintessential kind of Goan character, particularly the Christian character of Goa? And I built it around a house. And that house was Mario Miranda's house, his ancestral house. And that particular house became the area of my story. You know, I set the story in that house because that house was built in 17th century.
It's a landmark.
Yes, and it's been there, and the church there is very old. You know, so the whole character of Goa, Christian Goa, came through just in that one house. So my story was built around that house. And I found that, you know, it seemed to meet many objectives, particularly the one that I was interested in, which was to look at the Christian character of Goa, which is also quite unique, you know, compared to the rest of India, because we have many different kinds of Christian communities in the country, but this is quite unique. You know, it's like a kind of little piece of Latin culture in India, brought from Mediterranean, and maybe even connected to the Central and South American cultures and so on. So, because if you look at the music as well, you know, there are connections. And all of that I found extremely fascinating, and which is how I made that film.
A couple of questions on that. One is the casting, of course. You had Leela Naidu there, a little bit of Remo, a little bit of course, Nasruddin Shah played a protagonist there. How did you go about the casting in that film?
Well, you see, it took me a long time to cast that film because I needed to have people who also had the sort of visually they could look like Goans. You know, I mean, patrician Goan families. like the Mirandas and so on and so forth, who have a certain kind of characteristic.
Yeah.
So I was looking for that, and then finally I found the matron,
Yeah.
the matriarch, sorry, in Leela
Leela
Naidu.
Naidu.
But I also took a number of people from the village
The local,
itself.
yes, yes.
So you had a large number of people, particularly, when you have that big party, the engagement party and so on and so forth, that consisted almost entirely of people from
The village.
from Goa, and not only Goa, but from that village.
Right.
And that was one. And the other thing was that I also found, very interestingly, Remo, because at that time Remo was emerging.
Yes.
He was coming up. And he gave it a tremendous character.
Indeed.
To the film.
Indeed.
And so, all in all, it was a very satisfactory experience, because even for me, technically also, it was very interesting, because it's where I used all the interiors at night. They were shot in candlelight.
Oh.
It was no artificial light.
It reminds me of Barry Lyndon, the way Stanley Kubrick
Yeah,
shot
so
it.
because that was inspired by a film called Barry Lyndon, and but my cameraman Ashok Mehta, he did a lot of research into the size of candles, size of wicks, and so on and so forth, so that he could, because you see, color film in those days was slower than it is today, and so without showing grain, you had to get the right kind of character and so on. So there was a lot of technical things that we tried and did, which successfully with that film. And it was, and also, as maybe you don't know, but the fact is that it was shot entirely synchronized sound. We did not shoot it. We did not post-sync the dialogue.
Okay.
The dialogues were shot the way they were spoken.
There was no dubbing at all.
We did, no dubbing at all afterwards. So that was another thing that we did with that film. So I was quite satisfied with the way the film worked, actually.
The other question that I want to recall is, which would interest not only film lovers but otherwise as well, the portrayal of the community that was so very spot on, which is lacking in films otherwise generally. So was there any extra effort to ensure that everything is in place, or did it just flow through naturally?
Well, for me, you see, the effort was not really necessary, because I was familiar with a fair amount of it. Some things, of course, one learnt, but and also I had excellent advisors, local advisors, as well as those people who'd done a lot of ethnographic and anthropological work in Goa itself, and about the Christian community, as well as about the
Goans in general.
the whole different communities like Hindus, Muslims, and so on and so forth. So since all of that was being fed to me over a period of time, I didn't find it too difficult to do that, because I was also very keen to show the uniqueness of the historical influences in Goa compared to the rest of India.